She left everything behind, her home, her country, even the man she loved, to build a better life for both of them. For 5 years, she lived a life most people would never endure, working double shifts in a foreign land, counting every dollar, skipping meals, and sending everything she had back to the man she believed was waiting for her. She trusted him with her future, her sacrifices, and the quiet promise that one day, all of it would be worth it. Until one morning, without warning, she decided to come home. No calls, no messages, just a plane ticket and a heart full of hope. She imagined his reaction, the surprise on his face, the way he would pull her close after years apart. She held on to that image through the entire flight, through the long drive from the airport, through every second that brought her closer to the life she thought she had been building. But when she arrived, something felt off. There were cars lined up outside the house, unfamiliar faces dressed in celebration, music echoing through the air. For a moment, she thought she had the wrong address. But she didn't. She stepped inside, her heart racing, her mind trying to make sense of what she was seeing, and then she looked up. And there he was, standing at the altar, smiling, dressed as a groom. But what stopped her cold wasn't just him. It was the woman standing beside him, because she knew her, not as a stranger, not as an acquaintance, but as someone she had trusted with her secrets, her laughter, her life, her best friend. In that moment, everything she had built over 5 years collapsed without a sound. The sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the money she sent without hesitation, all of it suddenly meant something very different. And as the room filled with applause and celebration, she stood there, unnoticed for just a second longer, realizing that the life she thought she was returning to had already been taken from her. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. How does someone spend years of their life building a future with another person, sending every dollar they earn, trusting every word they hear, only to realize that the same person has been living a completely different life behind their back? How does that kind of betrayal even begin? And more importantly, how long had it been happening without her ever noticing? Because what she walked into that morning did not feel sudden. It felt established, organized, almost as if it had been carefully put together over time. Was this something that had been planned from the very beginning, or did something change along the way? Did he slowly drift into a different life while she was away, or had he always intended to use her sacrifices for something else? And then there was the question that refused to stay quiet, the one that cut deeper than anything else she was trying to process. How did her best friend, the one person she never questioned, become the woman standing at that altar? Because moments like this do not just happen overnight. They are built in silence, hidden in small decisions, quiet conversations, and choices made when no one is watching. And as she stood there trying to make sense of everything, one thing became painfully clear. This was not just a betrayal. This was a story that had been unfolding for far longer than she ever imagined. Amina had always been the kind of person people relied on, the one who stayed strong when things were uncertain and kept going even when the odds were not in her favor. She grew up understanding what it meant to struggle, watching her family stretch every dollar, learning early that stability was not something you waited for, it was something you built. And for her, love was never separate from responsibility. It was part of the same promise, to grow together, to support each other, to create something better than what they started with. She wasn't chasing luxury. She just didn't want to struggle anymore. When she met Kofi, everything about him felt like possibility. He was confident, full of plans, always talking about the future in a way that made it feel real, like it was just within reach. He knew how to speak in a way that made people believe him, not just in what he said, but in who he said he wanted to become. And in the beginning, he showed up in all the ways that mattered, attentive, affectionate, present. But over time, small things began to shift, not enough to raise alarms, just enough to be noticed if someone was looking closely. He started avoiding long conversations, cutting calls short with simple excuses, saying he was busy, tired, or dealing with something that needed his attention. The plans they once talked about in detail became shorter, less defined, replaced with vague reassurances that everything was still on track. Amina noticed it, but she explained it away, telling herself that distance changes communication, that life gets complicated, that what they had was still strong enough to carry them through. After all, she was working for both of them, sacrificing now so they could live better later. And then there was Zara. If there was one person Amina trusted without hesitation, it was her. Their bond went beyond friendship. It was built on years of shared experiences, late-night conversations, laughter that felt effortless, and a sense of understanding that didn't require explanation. Zara was always around, always supportive, always present in a way that felt natural. When Amina left to start her life abroad, Zara was one of the few people she stayed consistently connected to, someone who knew everything that was happening, someone who reassured her when things felt overwhelming. There was never a reason to doubt her, never a moment that suggested anything other than loyalty. Zara checked in on her, asked about her well-being, reminded her to stay strong when the work became too much. She even spoke about Kofi in ways that made Amina feel secure, reinforcing the belief that everything back home was exactly as it should be. It was the kind of trust that didn't require proof, the kind people rarely question because it feels too solid to break. Through messages, calls, and updates, Amina stayed connected to the life she had left behind, believing she was still part of it, believing nothing had changed in a way that truly mattered. She worked through exhaustion, through loneliness, holding on to the idea that every sacrifice was building something real, something waiting for her when she returned. And for a long time, there was nothing obvious to suggest otherwise. But somewhere along the way, something changed. At first, the changes were easy to ignore, the kind of things that could be explained away if you wanted them to be. Messages that used to come instantly began to take hours, sometimes an entire day. Calls that once stretched late into the night became shorter, more rushed, often ending with a reason that sounded just believable enough. Kofi would say he was busy, that something came up, that he would call back later, but later did not always come. Amina noticed, but she chose patience over suspicion, reminding herself that distance changes people, that time zones, work, and life itself can slowly shift the rhythm of communication. There were moments when she felt it more strongly, when a call would go unanswered longer than usual, or when his tone felt different, less present, less invested. But each time, she found a way to quiet those thoughts, leaning on the version of him she knew, the one she believed was still there. At first, she blamed the distance, telling herself that this was just another phase they would get through, another test of everything they had already endured. But over time, the pattern became harder to ignore. The missed calls were no longer occasional, they were frequent. The explanations started to repeat themselves, losing their weight with each use. Conversations became surface level, avoiding anything that required depth or emotion. And somewhere between what was said and what was left unsaid, Amina began to feel something she had not allowed herself to feel before. Uncertainty. It did not come all at once. It built slowly, quietly, until it reached a point where she could no longer sit with it. She needed clarity, something real, something she could see for herself instead of imagining from miles away. And that was when the decision formed, not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of a need to know the truth. She decided to go back. She did not tell Kofi. She did not tell Zara. There were no calls, no hints, no messages that could prepare anyone for her arrival. It was meant to be a surprise, the kind that would bring everything back to life, the kind that would remind them of what they had been holding on to all those years. She booked the flight quietly, packed her things with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation, and held on to the belief that whatever had been off lately would make sense once she was standing right in front of him. The journey felt longer than usual, every hour stretching with thoughts of what was waiting for her. She imagined his reaction again, replaying it in her mind, holding on to the version that made her smile. By the time she landed, her heart was already racing, caught somewhere between hope and something she could not fully name. When the taxi pulled up to the house, the first thing she noticed was the number of cars. It was more than usual, enough to make her pause for a second longer before stepping out. There was music playing, distant at first but clear enough to recognize that something was happening. Laughter followed, voices blending together in a way that felt unfamiliar, like she had stepped into a moment she had not been invited to. For a brief second, she questioned it. She wondered if she had made a mistake, if she had the wrong address, if somehow she had come to the wrong place after all these years. But everything about the house was the same, every detail exactly where it should be. And so she moved forward, Slowly, her steps cautious as her mind tried to catch up with what her eyes were beginning to see. As she got closer, the sound grew louder, clearer, filling the space around her. Guests were gathered, dressed in celebration, their attention focused somewhere ahead. No one noticed her at first. No one stopped her as she stepped further inside, her confusion now mixing with something heavier, something harder to ignore. She thought she had the wrong house, but deep down, she already knew she didn't. And then she saw him. Kofi stood at the front, dressed in a way she had never seen before, composed, smiling, surrounded by people who were there to witness something important. For a moment, her mind refused to accept what her eyes were showing her, searching for an explanation that would make it all make sense. But before she could find one, her gaze shifted, and that was when everything stopped. Standing beside him, dressed as the bride, was Zara. Not in a way that could be misunderstood, not in a way that could be explained away. It was clear, undeniable, final. The two people she trusted more than anyone else in her life were standing together in a moment that was never meant to include her. The air felt different, heavier, as if time itself had slowed just enough for her to feel every part of it. The music continued, the laughter remained, but none of it reached her anymore. All she could see was them, and all she could feel was the weight of everything she had given, everything she had believed, collapsing into a single moment she could not escape. But what happened next, no one expected. For a moment, no one moved. The room continued as if nothing had changed, as if the presence of Amina standing there did not rewrite everything that was happening in that space. But then the shift came, subtle at first, as a few people began to notice her, their expressions changing from celebration to confusion, and then to something else entirely. The music did not stop immediately, but the energy in the room began to fracture, piece by piece, as attention slowly turned toward the one person who was never meant to be there. Amina did not raise her voice at first. She did not create a scene the way people might expect. Instead, she stepped forward, her eyes fixed on Kofi and Zara, searching their faces for something that could explain what she was seeing. Anything that could make this moment less real. But there was nothing. No shock. No panic that matched hers. Just a stillness that felt almost rehearsed, as if this was a possibility they had considered but never believed would actually happen. Her voice, when it finally came, was steady, but it carried a weight that cut through the room. She looked directly at them and asked the only questions that mattered. How long? Was any of it real? The words did not need to be louder to be heard. They landed exactly where they were meant to, exposing everything that had been hidden behind years of trust and silence. There was a pause, one that stretched just long enough to make it clear that whatever answer came next had already been decided long before this moment. Kofi did not step forward. He did not try to explain in the way someone might when caught off guard. Instead, he looked at her with a calmness that felt completely out of place, and when he spoke, his words did not carry regret, they carried finality. You were never supposed to come back. It was not just what he said, it was how easily he said it. As if her absence had been part of the plan, as if her life abroad was not just distance but convenience, something that allowed everything happening here to exist without interruption. And in that moment, the situation shifted from emotional to something else entirely. Something that demanded understanding, not just reaction. Because this was no longer just about betrayal, it was about how it happened. When it started, who knew, and who didn't. The timeline that once felt simple now demanded to be re-examined, piece by piece. The years Amina spent working, sending money, believing she was building a future, now stood against another reality that had been unfolding at the same time. If you followed the details closely, patterns began to emerge. The delayed messages were not random. They aligned with moments when something else was happening back home. The missed calls were not just about being busy. They often came during times when he could not afford to be available. Conversations that felt shorter and more distant were not just changes in mood. They reflected a shift in priorities that had been happening gradually, quietly, without confrontation. And then there was Zara. Her role in all of this raised questions that did not have immediate answers. Was she drawn into it over time, influenced by proximity and circumstance, or had she been part of something more intentional from the beginning? Their communication, once seen as harmless and supportive, now held a different meaning when viewed through this new perspective. Messages, interactions, Moments that seemed ordinary before now felt like pieces of a larger story that had been carefully hidden. Looking at it from a distance, there were two possibilities that stood out. One suggested that Zara had been pulled into Kofi's world slowly, that proximity and familiarity created something that neither of them initially planned. The other pointed to something more calculated, where Kofi, understanding Amina's trust and absence, created a situation that worked in his favor, shaping events in a way that ensured everything remained under his control. But the truth rarely presents itself all at once. It reveals itself in fragments, in contradictions, in the small details that do not align perfectly with the version of events people choose to share. And as Amina stood there, facing the reality in front of her, the story was no longer just about what she had lost. It was about uncovering what had been happening all along, and whether the people she trusted had simply made a series of decisions, or had been part of something far more deliberate from the very beginning. The answers did not come all at once, and they did not come willingly. They revealed themselves in fragments, in hesitation, in the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. What began as a confrontation slowly turned into something else, something heavier, something that forced the truth into the open piece by piece. And as Amina stood there, refusing to look away, the story she had believed for years began to unravel in a way she could no longer ignore. It started with the timeline. What she thought had been distance and disconnection was, in reality, something far more defined. The relationship between Kofi and Zara had not just begun recently. It had been building for over 2 years, quietly, consistently, during the same period Amina was working and sending everything she had back home. 2 years of conversations, meetings, shared moments that existed alongside the life Amina believed she was still part of. And then came the part that changed everything. The money she had been sending, the sacrifices she made without question, the long hours, the exhaustion, all of it had been used for something she was never meant to see. The house she was standing in, the decorations surrounding her, even the wedding itself, it had all been funded by the life she thought she was building for herself. Every contribution she made had been redirected into a reality that excluded her entirely. There was no confusion left after that. No misunderstanding, no room for interpretation. Just a clear, undeniable truth that replaced everything she once believed. And in the middle of it all, as the weight of that realization settled in, the words that followed did not soften anything. They confirmed it. You weren't my partner. You were the plan. The room, once filled with celebration, shifted into something unrecognizable. Conversations stopped. Faces turned. The energy that once carried laughter now held tension, discomfort, and a silence that no one seemed ready to break. People looked at each other, unsure of where to stand, caught between witnessing something deeply personal and realizing they were part of a moment that should have never unfolded this way. Amina did not react immediately, not in the way people expected. There was no outburst, no sudden collapse. Instead, there was a stillness, the kind that comes when everything has already been taken from you in a single moment. The humiliation was not loud. It was quiet, internal, settling in with a clarity that left no room for denial. And then there was Zara. For a brief moment, there was still a question, a possibility that maybe she had been pulled into this, that maybe she did not fully understand what she was part of. But that possibility did not last. Because when the truth finally surfaced, it did not leave space for doubt. Zara knew. She had known everything. From the money being sent, to the promises being made, to the future Amina believed she was building, none of it had been hidden from her. She had listened, responded, reassured, all while being part of something that directly contradicted every word she said. The friendship Amina trusted, the bond she believed was unbreakable, had existed alongside a reality that dismantled it completely. And in that moment, the betrayal was no longer divided between two people. It was shared equally, fully, without excuse. What remained was not just the shock of what had happened, but the understanding of how deeply it had been rooted, how long it had existed, and how carefully it had been kept out of sight. And as the room stood still, holding the weight of everything that had just been revealed, one truth remained impossible to ignore. This was never an accident. What happened next did not follow the script anyone in that room expected. There was no breakdown, no desperate attempt to reclaim what had already been taken. Instead, Something shifted in Amina, something quiet but decisive, the kind of clarity that only comes when there is nothing left to lose. Because in that moment, she understood something that changed everything. The life she thought she had lost was never truly hers to begin with, but what she still had was control over what came next. She did not argue. She did not beg for explanations that no longer mattered. Instead, she asked questions, not emotional ones, but practical ones, the kind that forced attention away from the spectacle and toward the reality beneath it. The house, the accounts, the transfers, the records of everything she had sent over the years. What once felt like generosity now became evidence, and for the first time, the balance of power began to shift. Because the truth was simple. The foundation of everything they were standing on had come from her. The money used to secure the house, to build the life they were celebrating, even the event unfolding in that moment. All of it traced back to the sacrifices she made. And once that truth moved from emotion to fact, the situation was no longer just personal. It became something that could not be ignored or dismissed. She walked away that day, not in defeat, but with a level of certainty neither Kofi nor Zara had prepared for. The silence she left behind carried more weight than any argument ever could, because it meant this was no longer about confrontation. It was about consequences. And consequences have a way of unfolding in ways people rarely anticipate. 2 years later, the story looked very different. Amina was no longer defined by what happened in that room. She had rebuilt her life with intention, focusing on herself in ways she never had before. The same discipline that carried her through years of sacrifice became the foundation for something new, something that belonged entirely to her. She was stable, independent, and no longer tied to the version of the future she once believed in. The difference now was that everything she had, she built for herself. And then there was Kofi and Zara. What once appeared solid began to show cracks over time. The reality they built, the one that required secrecy and betrayal to exist, did not hold the same strength when faced with real pressure. Without the structure that Amina had unknowingly provided, things shifted. Financial strain replaced comfort. Tension replaced certainty. And the relationship that once thrived in hidden spaces struggled to survive in the open. Regret has a way of appearing when it is too late to change anything. And for Kofi, it came with the realization that what he had taken for granted was never something he could replace. But by then, Amina was no longer part of that story. She had moved forward in a way that did not require looking back, and that was something neither of them could undo. The woman they thought they broke rebuilt herself without them. And the question that remains is simple. Would you have seen the signs, or would you have trusted them too? As you think about everything that happened to Amina, there is one question that keeps coming back, one that is not as easy to answer as it seems at first. What would you have done in her situation? Would you have walked away the same way she did? Or would you have reacted differently in that moment when everything you believed in fell apart at once? And beyond that, there is another layer to this story that cannot be ignored. Do you think this was planned from the beginning, or did it slowly develop over time without her realizing what was really happening around her? Stories like this stay with people because they reflect situations that feel real, decisions that could happen to anyone under the right circumstances, and outcomes that are shaped by trust, timing, and the choices people make when no one is watching. That is why your perspective matters, because no two people see a story like this the same way, and sometimes the smallest detail can completely change how everything is understood. If you enjoy real-life stories with unexpected turns and moments that make you think long after the video ends, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. And if you think this story is hard to believe, wait until you hear what happened when a man discovered that his own twin brother had been living his life without him knowing, a situation that raises even more questions about identity, trust, and how well we really know the people closest to us.